quick, brief intro to my wonderful panelists today. I have here with me Mira Jacob. She's from New York. Mira teaches fiction at NYU, and her book, The Sleepwalker's Guide to Dancing, was shortlisted for the Tata First Literature Award. And she's also the co-founder of the much-loved Pete's Reading series in Brooklyn, which we hope to hear as we move along. Welcome, Mira, and thank you for being here with us. Mr. Abhijit Gupta, a known face here in Kolkata, worked just across the road here at ICI for many years, and then moved to Bengaluru and was an HR consultant, but I think his passion to write continued to stay with him the years that he's been working. And his debut novel is The Copper Sky. And thank you for being here with us, Abhijit. And last but not the least, Devdan Chaudhuri on my left. Pursuing his master's in economics, he lost the inspiration to become an economist and became a writer. So if there are economists sitting here, yes, I can see his mother clapping, and returned to Kolkata to work and also look after some of his family business. And his debut novel is The Anatomy of Life, which incidentally also was nominated for the Tibber Jones South Asia Prize in 2013. So this is the panel, the books are all here, and the way we're going to run this session is I'm going to ask them a couple of questions, and I would request you to also make note of your questions because I will have a session for the audience at the end. We do have to keep in mind that we have a time constraint, there are other sessions, so let me start off to a question to all three of you. I understand, Mira, you took 10 years to write this. Abhijit, you took around 6 to 7 years, if I'm not mistaken, and you took around 7 years. Nearly 10 years. Okay, so 10 years, 7 years to write their first novel. That can be a little demoralizing for those who want to write. Now, does it normally, and I know there are many who've taken many more years, does it normally take that long to write? And the question is really, what is the process? Why does it take so long, since I see an average of nearly 8 years that you took? Hopefully it's not going to take so long for your second. So over to you, Mira.
Yeah, I hope it doesn't take so long for the second, but I can tell you that when I first found out the book was getting published and I went out on tour, I was sort of saying very quietly to just a few people, yeah, it took me 10 years, because I was so embarrassed. And then I found out from nearly every novelist that I talked to that it took them somewhere between, just wide range, somewhere between 7 and 12 years to come out with their first book. People say that your first novel, it takes you your whole life to get to your first novel, to be able to write everything, and part of that is learning the process. For me, it was a really specific thing, actually. It's that I was writing this book and I had a father in it who I really cared about and was wonderful, and I thought I was going to give him a disease that his brain would kind of go off and his family would be around him watching him recede, and then my actual father in real life started dying, and I had to put the book away because I felt that, it sounds so silly when I say this, but I somehow felt that I had cursed him, and I sort of had that magical thinking moment where I thought if I didn't write about it anymore, then he would live, and he actually didn't. He died. So I took 3 years of a pause from the book, and when I came back, it was strangely to put him in the book, he hadn't been there before, and to spend the next 6 years saying goodbye to him the way that I wanted to.
Yes, it took me 7 years, but I wrote the first draft in probably 3 years. Then I realized it was too long, and it took me 3 years to cut it down.
Actually, it took me about 7 years just to go through the history of philosophy, Western, Eastern, Northern, and that's why there was a long reading list which had to be followed. And also, I don't know, I didn't have the luxury of a 24/7 time to me to write, so I used to have day jobs. Then again, I have to do it in the night. So that way, you have to, first time, that's where your time limit is not, it may sound 10 years, but actually you're working only in the nights for 3-4 hours because you have got day jobs and other things to do. So that's why probably it takes a bit longer. And for my case, it was more about reading other things first. And there are 2 essays in the novel, which is an outcome of all that reading.
Okay, great. So it's very heartening, ladies and gentlemen. Even if you take the next 10 years to write your first novel, you're still at it, as you can see from the 3 of my panelists here. The session says there's no I in the novel, but I've been given these books, and I have a confession around 2 weeks back. It was like going back to school and staying up all night, trying to do justice, reading the books before I met the authors themselves. I don't know whether this will be a fair statement because I've just met you, Mira, but your book seems to draw whatever I've read about you, and I've Googled you and researched you a bit, from a lot of your past experiences. And therefore the question is, how much of the characters, I mean, there's a character, if I'm not mistaken, Dimple, and there's Dr. George and Chaco. Since you come from this background and, you know, from India, how many of these are actually real characters that you've had in your family who have influenced you? I'll come to the father bit a little later. And more important is, your protagonist is Amina Eapen. So how much of you are there in Amina, or if at all?
Yeah. So it's a question that I get often, and there are things I did not go to any pains to hide at all. I said it where I grew up, which is Corrales, New Mexico, which was a village until last year. I think it just hit 10,000 people. We were one of the only East Indian families in that village. I think we might still be. And it's in New Mexico, which is not really what you hear often, right? You hear of the Indians that go to New Jersey and Connecticut. And so I really wanted to write about this very specific time and place. In terms of the character, Amina, I hate that it's such a funny thing to say, but I actually I found her really frustrating as a character. She's somebody who has this secret superpower that she doesn't acknowledge. She's a photographer who took a really damaging photo of in her photojournalism career, and she can't recover from it. So what has she done? She's gone to weddings. And she's this photographer who takes pictures of weddings, but you know how weddings always have those kind of unseemly moments where everybody's a little bit frayed and people are yelling at each other. She always gets those pictures. And she's really embarrassed about this, about herself. And she's this person who, without realizing it, has the power to really see things as they are. I don't really think, unfortunately, I'm that closely aligned with her in terms of having a secret superpower. Any power I've ever had in my life, I always feel like I've been running after it with both hands, trying to say, I've got this. And so she's not me as a person, but the culture that she's from and that feeling of being invisible in the larger context of America, those are absolutely things.
So how do you draw on this character called Amina? If it was not you and you were writing, were there characters in your family, friends? How would you build that character?
Yes, I gave her this thing that I was really excited to see through, which is that she kept getting all these terrible pictures of these weddings, and she had them in a box, and I wanted to see what was happening with her career. And in some ways, that's probably something that we're all kind of aware of, having this secret, right? This kind of artistic secret that the rest of the world doesn't know about you. And like you, I had day jobs, and people thought I was one person, but I had this passion. So that part of it, I would say, you know, I understand that. The way she went about it and the things that she did, not so much for me.
Great. Abhijit, you were candid enough to say that this is not an autobiographical novel, yet your protagonist, Omar, goes to LSE, and I understand that you did that sometime in your life. So while there's no I in the novel, how much of it is you in Omar and the experiences that Omar goes through at LSE, which you do bring up very, very candidly?
Well,
Can you just speak into? Yeah, turn this.
first of all, let me say that one of the people who read my book, a dear friend of ours, she said, you know, I felt like shaking Amar at times. He was so priggish. So, so I hastily have to say it wasn't me. But I don't think anybody who's writing a book on life and on emotions, joys, sorrows, happiness, can really avoid using his or her own experiences to describe it. I mean, I know the internet offers various formulae, but how can you write about your first love, your first excitement at falling in love from something that internet has given you? How can you write about somebody who's this sorrow, somebody who you love has gone? You have to draw on your own experience, own wealth, own pain to write that. So I believe that for certain kinds of novels, and I'm not talking about the science fiction, for certain kind of novels you have to delve deep into you to develop some of the characters. So to that extent, there must be something of me in that. But which part, I don't know.
Devdan, yours was a very, very interesting book because it's the first book, at least I've read, which had no names of characters. Each character is addressed as his protagonist is the poet. He's an economist and he writes about the poet. And there are other characters like the sweetheart, the journalist, and so on. So each character is known by the profession or what he practices. Am I right? Yeah.
Not always. Like a
Not
virgin,
always.
Not
Yeah.
always.
Yeah, but largely. So therefore, you know, like there are characters like Omar and Amina and all. Here's was this, and also, so what made you choose this format of not actually putting a name to a character? Number one, and there's a whole lot of philosophy that you did talk about the research that you did. So my question to you is: A, why did you choose this format, and how did you actually and was it because it was on philosophy that you needed to get away from any name or any recognition that the reader would have?
The quest for this writing this novel was to figure out the structure of the human self that we all inherit. In that case, something universal. So in this case, how the novel is trying to figure out and give insights to what is universal to us. So in this milieu, if I put a guy from Calcutta, Bengali, then a Tamilian, then I'm forced to write about certain culture aspects. Then I'm moving away from being universal into specifics, which I wanted to avoid. And also the attitude of the novel that it doesn't matter really who you are, what your religion is, whether you're a Bengali or whatever, how you speak English. It's about what you do in life, how you behave, you know, what your dreams, how you acting to others. This is what I think is essential to our lives. This is what I wanted to highlight and write about. In this way, so I could, when I'm doing this self, so I didn't want the readers to get distracted with any other ideas of, as a Bengali or Tamilian or Calcutta, Bombay. Even the places are not named in this song.
Yes, yeah. She moves to a city.
So I just wanted to move away from this city-based novel and a culture-based novel.
So is there any Devdan in the poet?
There is a bit of, because when I read this, like whatever the topic, first thing came to my mind was there is not one eye, actually there are two eyes, because one is I, how I live, and there is this eye of the creative self, which is very different, Then I realized after writing what your creative self is and what he wants you to do, because that becomes a process of discovery, what you're actually trying to do, which is not always there in your conscious thoughts. So this creative self obviously uses experiences of your own life, what you have, and I've seen feelings, what have touched you in your life, what you have made you feel deeply, that somehow gets transferred into your work. So there is this, always this conflict or kind of a cooperation between I, as they've done, and also the I of that very mystical creative self which we all have within ourselves.
Great. Mira, the book is dedicated to your father, Mr. Philip Jacob. And I understand that you lost him while you were writing this book. And that the character of Thomas, which is Amina's father in the book, began to take on his traits.
Yes.
This must have been a very strange experience, and more complex than it sounds. How did this fiction and reality really entwine, and how difficult was it to put it together?
Such a good question. So I'll tell you what happened is I told you I had this idea for the father, and I was a year into writing the book and felt really good about the father, and then my father, of course, got sick. And I don't know if anyone here has lost somebody slowly to, I lost my father to cancer, but there's something that happens to you physically and mentally, which is that the weight of carrying your hope for that person, it's so hard, because all your time and all of your heart is taken up with this hope, and hope is unbearably heavy, actually, to carry. And after a while, I just stopped being able to do anything else, because I was going in all these rooms with him and all these hospital corridors and through all of these surgeries, and I just felt myself shutting down a lot. And when he died, sometimes when I think of that time, I think of my emotional life as a huge hotel with a rooms, and it was really blazing, and I was, in my 30s, and life was gorgeous. And then when he got sick, I felt like slowly all the lights went out in all of those floors until it was just me in the middle with a single light on, just waiting it out. It was like waiting out a storm. And so when he died, and I started writing the book again, it was the weirdest thing. I would try to write these scenes with the old father, and I would write my father, and I would write his face, because that was the face I missed, and I would write his mannerisms, which I just, and I would also write, because you know what's funny is when someone dies, there's this tendency to lionize them and talk about them as though they were this perfect thing, and you know what I missed? I missed the imperfect person. I missed the fights. I missed the casualness with which you can have a relationship when it's not leaving you. So that went into this, and then one day my husband, who's a filmmaker, says to me, "So, how's the book going?" And I said, "Yeah, I've ruined it." And he said, "What do you mean?" And I said, "I have totally," and I said it in this horribly confessional way, and I said, I lost my mind. I put my dad in it, and he's there now, and I know it's not the right thing to do because I'm a fiction writer, but I keep doing it, and I keep doing it because it feels good, and I know it's not the right thing to do. And he said this really sweet thing, which I'll always think was an incredible gift, is he said, "Why would that be the wrong thing to do?" And I said, "Because it's against the rules." And he said, "But whose rules are those?" Which is such a nice thing to say, right? Because I hadn't thought of it that way. And I think oftentimes as writers, all of us, we do this thing where you try to get into a room with your characters, you try to see what they're doing, and you try to connect to them. And for me, when I was not telling myself I was really writing my father, when I wasn't sort of admitting that, I was outside of that room looking in. And what my husband did, which is this very sweet thing, is he sort of picked up a chair and threw it through a window, and the window broke, and he said, "Go that way." And so I did. You know, I went right into that room, and I got to be there, and I was there for years, and I got to just live in that place, and it felt really good to do that.
Wonderful. Thanks for sharing that with us. Abhijit, your book suggests aspects of a lost generation. That's what I felt, in being neither East nor West. A bit of an anti-British feeling, if I were to put it, bordering on racism. So what made you feel this way? I mean, considering that you worked for a British MNC like ICI, was it your experiences there? Or was it when you went to study at England and you went as an Indian at a time when England was, LSE is still LSE? What were those facets that actually got these very, very deep feelings into the book?
Yes, it's a difficult question. But I think it predates my working experience. It predates my time there. It goes back to my childhood days when we grew up. I grew up before independence, and I used to study in a convent school in Jodhpur, where the history books we read were all written by the ruling classes, the ruling British. And where I found that all the people we regarded as heroes were made into caricature figures. They were tiny pygmies. People like, for example, Tipu Sultan, who was a genius. And next to him, Clive was a pygmy. But these are, and then this constant feeling that was perhaps unconsciously projected by our teachers, that whatever Indian was second class. It was not the top. And at home we had a very nationalist family. We would talk, my parents would talk, my other relatives would talk about the movement to get the British out, although my father was in government service. All this sank in, and then when I went to England, to the London School of Economics, this was a peculiar dichotomy I faced, that here we was somebody who was grown up to dislike the British, hate the British, and yet here was I, sitting at the feet of the British to learn. So this dichotomy was a very difficult one to manage. And as a result, this spilled out in many ways, and Amar reflects some of the ways it did spill out.
Great. Amazing, amazing. And Devdan, your story is about the philosophy that the poet goes through, and if I'm not mistaken, there are 6 constructs. Could you share with the audience what are these and what exactly are you trying to say through the poet? Would you like to just...
Yeah, as I said, that is a inquest about the nature of the human self, and there is an essay in the novel which actually proposes what our self is, and that is like original piece of work or philosophy. But the novel moves through 6 chapters, which are titled Seasons, My Red Void. I think after that is Circles and Spheres, Balance, Center and Periphery, and The Wheel. These are 6 abstract ideas, or what I call the invisible structures of life through which our lives are moving, you know. This we can't see, it's intangible, yet we experience them every moment of our lives. How I do it, you know, it will take a long time to explain. But idea is that to see the invisible structures of life, what cannot be seen, and the intangible that controls us. And I was feeling always, I think from my boyhood, that there are some invisible things which control us, you know, like it is not what we see, but only the invisible is actually real. So this is a strange feeling. I think that really went into the process of trying to see what are the processes and invisible aspects of our life which are controlling our lives, but we are not conscious of. So this was the idea to see them, and also that's why it's called Anatomy of Life, because this 6 structures come together in the end to suggest an anatomy of life which is universal.
Wow, you've even taken and answered my next question. But really, it was amazing when I first was invited to do this panel, and I saw the books, and I thought they were wonderful names. You know, Sleepwalker's Guide to Dancing. Yours was The Copper Sky, The Anatomy of Life, and often aspiring writers, or when we were asked to write in school and all, we didn't know whether you first think of the name of your book and then you write your book, or do you write your book and then come up with a name? And all three of you have come up with very amazing and very interesting names. And I was trying to decipher while I read what was the connection with the story. So therefore the question to you, Mira, is how do you name your book? And The Sleepwalker's Guide to Dancing. There is a bit of sleep disorder in Akhil, and I didn't know whether that was it. So could you share with us how this came about?
Yeah, actually, there are many sleeping disorders in this book. There's narcolepsy, and there's insomnia, and there is an actual sleepwalker. And for me, it made sense that would be the kind of disease that would travel across country lines, right? If you're going to kind of go into another world, that's the disease that will take you over. And also part of that is because when we were in America, so much of what we spent our time doing was kind of holding ourselves in this way to pass for Americans. And a lot of that meant letting go of some of the mannerisms and letting go of the speech and the way that we would move at home. And it made sense to me that when you go home then, after a whole day of pretending to be part of a culture that you're not, that your subconscious would just wreak havoc on what you do. So this title for me, though, is actually a really hopeful one, because there's a very sad thing at the center of the book that happens. I should tell you, it's a funny book, so it's not that sad. But there's a sad thing that happens in the book, and it happens due to a sleepwalker, and it sort of unwinds throughout the whole book. And it's this idea of what if he would have been given the option to dance instead of sleepwalk? What would it mean to the world and to this world of this family if he would have found another way out of that? Does that make sense? So for me, it's a bit of a hopeful title, really.
So did you think about it in the beginning? Did it evolve?
It came right in the middle. And I was told by everybody when the book sold, oh, they'll never let you keep the title. Never gonna let you keep the title. That's never gonna happen. And then they did. And I will tell you, the only people that haven't wanted the title are the Polish who asked me if they could change the title to The Tangy Taste of Pomegranates. No idea what I said. Is there a pomegranate in the book? And they said, yeah.
So Abhijit, over to you. The Copper Sky. I mean, we've seen lots of colors, and why the Copper Sky?
Well, yes, it goes back. Actually, when I started this book, I thought of, let me at least give it a title, and it was Fog and Mellow Sunshine, because it's so true of London. But then I found that not very apt. And I remember the first day I arrived in London after a 26-hour flight. In those days, it used to take that much time. I was tired, jet lagged, and got into the coach in Victoria, going to Victoria Port Station, and I looked out, and it was foggy. It was half light. It was dark. It was, very depressing. And I looked up, and the sky was, the fog and the clouds was reflecting the lights of the city. And it looked like a copper sky. Now, that night, the copper sky was a very unfriendly sky. But as the months passed, the copper sky would change its mood. So sometimes it was full of joy, sometimes sad, sometimes, oppressive. So that's the origin.
Great. Devdan, would you want to add a line to what you did?
I think I just answered. No,
Yeah,
that's why I think the 6 thematic chapters which come together to form an anatomy of life to suggest this is exactly what is it.
I have a follow-up question though. Did anyone ever tell you that it wasn't going to work or that you were going to get a different title?
No one.
Oh, okay.
Okay, the next option is it's always right for me to ask you to read your favorite passage, but I've got 3 of my favorite bits. So, would you like to read and share something that you want to with the audience? I'm okay with that. But you want me to read and then
You
ask
do
you a
it.
question?
You do it. Yeah.
So, I'd encourage all of you to pick up the book after this and read all the 3. But let me start with Devdan. Again, as I said that, I've not done full justice. But there's some passages that really move me, and I'm going to read really short excerpts, and I'm going to try and ask you a specific question. This is a very interesting one that I picked up from Devdan. It's called Mira Void. The girl was wearing lipstick of a shade of orange. She was lying naked and in position, waiting for the maneuver of penetration on a moist, hard bed. At that precise moment, the air, condensed by the smell of dampness, heat and desire, was choked with the loud noise of a religious prayer, amplified by an electronic sound device. The announcement of the prayer alarmed the girl. She grappled for the sheet of cloth that had fallen on the floor by the side of the bed, fiercely shook her head, pushed the poet away, grabbed the sheet and covered herself with a loud print of flowery motifs. Then she indicated towards the direction of the prayer with eyebrows and head. The poet understood. She was unwilling to have sex while the prayer continued from the crest of a nearby minaret. The poet pulled away to one side of the bed. The girl made a gesture with her hand. It suggested, "We have to wait." The poet gave his nod of consent. The voice filtered through the closed wooden windows and the destitute bricks of the old building. The room was large and had a high ceiling, but it was partitioned into several small cubicles, furnished with narrow beds and loose hooks on the wall. Very, very interesting. I mean, you're in the act, you're just about getting into it, and this religious voice comes through. What made you think? Is it something that you've experienced? I'm sorry for being... And it's so true, I mean, or is it something that sex and religion don't go? What was the thought, and what were you trying to really...
See, on the second chapter, it's called the Mira Void, where I explore all kinds of voids, void of loneliness, to the spiritual void, to the scientific void. In the beginning of the novel, in the chapter, I required what you call an event that will reveal that there are 2 sides to our own self. There is the narrow mind coming from the selfish ego, and there is the broader mind, which comes from your heart. That's a duality between what you call the narrowness and the like a vision. That is the thing I wanted the poet to realize. So in the end, so basically I needed a very absurd circumstance where the poet will be laughing at himself, what is he doing, He will be caught in a very absurd situation and he'll be laughing at himself, what he's up to. So I needed an absurd thing. So I didn't have it, the story behind it is far more interesting, So what happened was, I was stuck, I was writing the other part, but I still did not have the beginning of that chapter. So I didn't have that striking, absurd, kind of a experience for the poet. So I do a lot of meditation. So one day I decided, let me meditate and try to, I need to figure this out because it's really getting, I can't figure things out. So I meditated and I put the question within me. And in the night, I had a dream. And the dream was that I am walking inside sort of a destitute large building, When I walk in, there are lions around, but they don't attack me. They don't even acknowledge my presence. Then I walk into the steps, and then I come to a room. Then there's some kind of alien woman with wings all around. It sounds really, this is how I dream, very absurd dreams. And the alien women are there, and suddenly there's sort of a kind of a sexual thing with this alien woman. At that moment, the lion starts to roar. And whenever the lion starts to roar, they just shift back to the wall and turn into stone. They become statues. And that is how the dream ended. In the morning when I woke up, I was just thinking of this crazy dream. At that moment, it struck me, I can use the dream and how that can correspond to a reality, how the real situation. Then I use the religious prayer and poet going to a brothel, and that is how it came about. Now this is the real story.
So, don't stop dreaming. You can even use your dreams to write your first novel. There's a lot of LSE, there's a lot of British racism we talked about, but you've touched on a lot of social issues as well, about Omar going through a kind of a relationship with this married single woman. Another one, there's a bit of alternate sexuality. I don't know whether there's the things that you experienced when you were there, but this was a very interesting one because in Bengal we have always known about this single bodhi and this the neighbor who's always prying to see whether she's free and if there can be a little affair or a little casual blink. And here I found this very, very interesting, where it says, they chatted desultorily for some time. She seemed preoccupied. He was uncomfortable at the thought of what might follow dinner. Let me get dinner on the table before you start complaining that I'm starving you. Omar ate, but not with his usual gusto. After they had done the washing up, she broached the subject he had been dreading. So, are we going to have the second dance lesson today? Omar's heart fell. This business of erotic Russian roulette was proving too taxing for him. Yet he could think of no way of backing away. So with an enthusiasm he was far from feeling, he said, but of course, as long as Buri is fast asleep. Buri is the little daughter. Like a little girl, and with an open air of complicity, she tiptoed across to the curtain and peeped in, and then nodded her head. Initially, as the music started, both were stiff and self-conscious. But then the soft music worked its magic, and soon Omar found himself dancing close to her. She danced with her eyes closed, lost in her own private world, but her warm body was much alive. He found himself guiltily enjoying it. But before long, he realized they were skating dangerously near the edge. This game of sexual brinksmanship could easily get out of control. He recognized that his body wanted it to be, yet he knew he had to stop. I need to get back, Gedi. There's an assignment I have to sit down and complete tonight because I'm meeting my tutor tomorrow. Tomorrow? But tomorrow's a Saturday. And who is this crazy tutor who works on a Saturday? They usually don't work on Saturdays, but he has to go out of town next week for a lecture. So he's trying to finish pending work over the weekend. Lies following lies. Kanika was not convinced and seemed displeased. Her face hardened. Well, it's up to you, and I thought that this being the beginning of a weekend, we could have spent more time together. Anyway, please yourself. And as he walked out of the door, Omar decided that he could not continue with this charade anymore. It was taking too much of a toll on him. The next week, he rang up and made an excuse for not being able to visit. She sounded cold and distant. So, would you be able to throw some light as to how this and
Actually, I think you hit the nail on the head about talking about the bodhis, the eternal bodhi. I'm not sure whether I can really talk about whether this is a personal experience or not. But I do know that this can happen. I do know that sometimes one comes perilously near the edge, and particularly for a lonely young man and a lonely young wife or middle-aged wife whose husband was working somewhere else. And this could have easily led to a conflagration. I mean, it was just a very thin line which separated. So this was an experience, I think, which perhaps many people have, many people get to that point of before it's the point of no return. And this is certainly the kind of fantasy also which the young Indian student had.
Wonderful. And Mira, ending with your bit. There's this part which really stayed with me. While I don't want to give the story away, when Amina loses her brother, and I won't even share what happens and the mother's reaction. And I'll just read out that little bit, and question really will follow after that. This is a very, very, very poignant scene in the book where the protagonist Amina just loses the brother and she's with the parents, and it's really the mother's reaction. It was instantly worse without her there. They weren't out of the parking lot before Amina felt the silence slam down swiftly between them, smooth and relentless as concrete. Kamla, which is the mother, shifted the car into gear, and Amina watched her father through the passenger mirror. Strangely, he looked normal to her now, calm and fatigued as he always did when he came back from work, but okay. She could not see her mother's face. "We need to call Chaco and Bala," he said as they got onto the highway. "Sanji will. We should call them ourselves. You call." Outside, the cars passed blurrily, buffeting against them with a pop of wind before breaking away into the horizon. Kamla moved into the left lane. "Where are you going?" Thomas asked. Amina looked out of the window and saw they were headed up I-40. "The car," Amina's mother said. "Later, Kamla. We'll see it later. They haven't gotten off the mountain yet." "Today." Amina felt her father's gaze through the rear-view mirror. He leaned over to her mother and whispered something to her in Malayalam, but she shoved his head away. "So she'll stay in the car. So what?" "I need you to stay in the car," her father was saying. He had opened the back seat door and was kneeling next to her, looking into her eyes. "I need you to stay here, okay? Can you do that, Ami? Will you do that for me?" The car was parked to the side of the road. Outside, the mountain air smelled like pinions and rock and gas and ashes, and Amina nodded. She watched as she turned and ran up to catch up with her mother, who was already stalking up the bend towards the guardrail, a black braid bouncing against her back. Watching her through the window, Amina was sure they were in the wrong spot. The road looked much to itself, the same twisted vein of asphalt they always rode to the peak, the same low guardrails that held tops of the evergreens at bay. Two white pickup trucks and men in orange jackets greeted her parents, pointing below with gloved hands. Her parents turned and looked. What was it that they saw that day? What happened to Akhil's car that rooted her father to the spot as her mother turned around, first walking towards the road, then carefully kneeling on it, her eyes flickering shut? And were they ever forever lost to each other in that moment, completing that severing that had begun on the last trip to Salem? Or did their connection fray more slowly as the everyday weight of what had happened came down to bear on them? Amina would never know for days. She could not close her eyes without seeing her parents, as they had been right before they looked down, the tips of the evergreens spread out before them like waves, the New Mexico sky black and white as eternity. So she gets this news and she just drives to the spot.
Yeah.
Why and how and what
Yeah.
really brings this?
Yeah, so we're not giving anything away to say that the brother dies, because you find that out quite early on in the book, but what's just happened in that scene is they go and visit the spot where his car crashed, and it's the day that they've lost him. And what I was thinking when I wrote that, I don't know if, sometimes you see in life something you just can't unsee, right? You just can't unsee it. And it's so painful what you've seen, and you know when you've seen this thing because it sends something right down the middle of you, and those parts of you are never sewn up again. And I feel like I had seen a few things by that point in my life. I'd seen a few things that I knew had forever altered the way that I would see everything. And specifically in that moment, it was this mother. I'm a mother now, and I know this kind of fear that you live with constantly, that something will happen to your child. And she had known, this mother, the whole time she was thinking something's going to happen to my son, something. And then it happens, it happens, the worst happens. and she doesn't want to believe it. And when she sees it, it's over for her, right? Some part of her is forever going to be standing on that mountain right before you look down. That moment when you're still yourself. You're still yourself until right when you see what has happened, and then you're never yourself again. And it was so important for me to get that, because I think that we all walk around with those in us, don't we? We've all seen something like that. We've all seen something that's changed us so seismically, and I felt like it was important to pay homage in a way to just that moment.
Wonderful. So more when you read the book. I think we need to respect time, and I want to keep some questions for the audience as well. But before I finish this session, a lot of young aspirants and all who are here, they want to draw inspiration from the way you've spent 10 years, 8 years, 6 years writing this book. Quick 1 or 2 words of advice for them. Devdan.
Like, only send it to the publishers when you think you cannot change a single word. Do not hurry into publication. This is the right idea.
Well, I think that's probably the most sensible thing that you can do. But I think there is a need for a certain time to elapse after you finished your final draft, and a certain distance from the book, and then rereading will probably highlight a lot of things which need changing. So have a little bit of a gap between your final manuscript and the first editing.
My advice would be to keep going. All of us are up here on this stage, and sometimes when you see something like this, you think that a writer has been celebrated since day one, and that somehow this is just the life that you've had for 10 years, 20, really. I was just a girl in a corner writing and writing and writing, and nobody told me that any book would ever be published, and nobody knows that about you. So you have to know it yourself. If you're a writer, you have to just know it yourself and keep going.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Mira, Abhijit, and Devdan. Questions over to you, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, the gentleman right up here in front. And if you have a specific question, would you even address it to the respective author, please?
It's not exactly a question. It is an octogenarian's observation with these young people, as well as perhaps he is also like me. I do not know. I'm 35, modern. 1935. So I feel, and I am not exactly literary man, I am from science. I was with Bhava. But still I came here because I like this ambient and I like to hear people in all subjects. Now one thing I tell is there is no invisible thing which controls your life. I feel it is the time, the period, and the life you have gone through. It molds you over the years. So that is why, whenever we read Tolstoy and others, that was some type of a model. Then where Sarath Chandra Bose or Rabindranath was another type. And now we are hearing you also. It is another type. Good thing to hear all of you, and wish all of you best of my good wishes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Yes, the gentleman right at the back. We have a mic for him, please.
Hello everyone. Yeah, my question is, I remember reading the picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde, where this great painter paints a great painting which he thinks is the best work of his life ever. And when he paints that, he thinks that he should not display it for public because, it will bear his soul out in public, and public will make, they'll judge him, how shallow he is or how brilliant he is, and, they'll judge what he is from inside. And, as you all are authors and you have derived stories from your life, did you ever think that it is easy or it is tough on your part to derive stories from your life? Did you ever think that people will judge you, call you a coward, or call you courageous in a sense that you had the courage to tell that story in public? I mean, what was your sense when you started writing?
Yeah. Okay, then.
Well, I would think that in the beginning of each novel there is a work of fiction. And so you must read it as fiction, and because as you see that a dream can give a direction to a novel, which something might have happened, but the effect would be something quite different how it comes out in the novel. So it is not really an actual representation of how I am or how we are. It is an aspect of us, I would only like to say. And the writing and the novel is kind of a thing you want to do for society and share others. So you're not fearful, you are joyous to share things with others.
That's a good, and I will add on to that. So one of the things that I was doing when I was writing is I was very shocked. Obviously, I'm talking about this a lot, but I was very shocked at how devastating death is, because it's amazing to me that we all go through it and we see it happen to our loved ones, and we still keep walking in the universe. I'm absolutely stunned by that revelation. And so for me, when I was writing, I just wanted, nobody was writing the book that I wanted when I was going through it. Nobody was writing the book that was both funny and sad and made me feel like I was whole. So I just wrote for that. So I wasn't worried about the criticism as much as I was worried about writing the book that I wished I could have gotten from the shelf. Does that make sense? It was more about that, yeah.
But I think that your question is a very relevant one, because I found that when I was writing for myself. I wasn't writing for other people. But then as the novel progressed, this thought was there, am I bearing too much of myself? And what will be the reaction? So this is a very real fear I think some of us had.
Yes, Hari.
About a year and a half ago, Jeffrey Archer came and addressed Our Ladies organization, and he made a very funny kind of, I don't know whether it was funny or relevant or what. He said that he is very organized when he sits to write. He works from 8 o'clock to 10 o'clock, then he has a break, then he works for another 2 hours, then he has a break, then he works for another 2 hours, then he has a break, and then he works for the last 2 hours. And he keeps up the schedule all the time. Do any of you follow a schedule when you write things like this? Or is it just the mood strikes you and then you go and sit down somewhere and put whatever thoughts are passing through your mind or whatever feelings are going through you emotionally or whatever, and you're putting it onto paper? Or is it all calculated? Because Jeffrey Archer is a very popular writer. Well, a lot of people don't like what he writes, but sometimes sometimes he has a very arrogant attitude, which I thought was awful when he was addressing us, because as Abhijit said, it was as if a Britisher was addressing an Indian. I felt very, bad about that sort of thing. But because he was Jeffrey Archer, all the ladies lapped it up. There were a few of us who didn't like it at all, one of them being me. But I thought it was very courageous of him to tell us that he has this kind of a strict schedule when he was writing a book. And then he tells you when he's going to publish that book. Because the last of that Clifton Chronicles, which he's writing, he's written 4 of them, the last one is supposed to be coming out this year in July. He tells you the month also. So do you people have that kind of a schedule when you're sitting to write, or just comes out of your heart?
Well, I have an observation for you, which is that I think that by and large, every writer, because it's such a fickle medium, honestly, some days you'll be sitting there for 8 hours and not get a sentence out. And some days, right, you'll sit down for 20 minutes and 5 golden pages will come out. And so it's such a strange muse. So what I found is I think that many writers have this very dogmatic way of talking about their process, because they really believe that is the way that works. I am not a person that has a process. I was a person that had to support my family the whole time, so I was a person that wrote from 11 at night till 1 in the morning. But that was really out of necessity. I imagine that will change. And I imagine that then I'll come up with some very dogmatic way of talking of my process that will make everyone in the room really uncomfortable.
Of course, Abhijit, you have written your first book, and all of you have written your first novel. And Jeffrey Archer has written many, many, many books. What about you, Abhijit?
Well, I think some authors probably approach it in a formulaic kind of way. That I have to work 8 hours a day, whatever. As far as I was concerned, there's no question about it. As Mira said, you'd sit down, and that nothing would come. I mean, it was total block. And sometimes the mood would take you. So I certainly was not able to follow any such process of fixed hours.
I think I only can write in the night. I think this is how I got into it, because day job, it's only night that my concentration comes. So I think I am just a night novelist. Means in the daytime I'm stupid, I can't write. Only in the night I get that concentration to really put something on the page.
Can your next book be called The Night Novelist?
Yeah, any further questions? Yes, the gentleman here.
Yes, this question is related to Ms. Mira.
Sorry, yeah. We'll have you after that. Yeah.
Go ahead, yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay, to Mira Jacob. I mean, see, I'm not drawing any parallel or anything, but one of the, differences between arts and science is that in science we deal with the truth. In arts, everything is fiction. Okay, part of your imagination which doesn't exist, not necessarily, of course. I mean, just 1 minute. It's partly fictionalized. So, one of the things is we have editions of the quote-unquote truth, chemistry or physics books or math coming all the way. So would you like to, since you thought that whose rules are it anyway, would you like to have quote-unquote another edition or kind of a thing in nature, or when you can change that, something in the book, would you ever like to change what you write in your first novel?
Oh, okay, so you're asking, is there something in the first novel that I would rewrite because I have new knowledge of it now? Is that, no.
Not exactly new,
Not
some kind of a new kind of experience or something you'd like to change in your first novel. Because creators don't change whatever they write or shoot or anything. That's what I'm asking.
Oh yeah, no, it's a good question. I am a person that rewrites and rewrites and rewrites, so I will tell you that I'll look at page 1 and think, oh, I really should have just redone that sentence. And then all the time when I read for people, which I do quite often, I will go and change sentences to deliver something else that I would like, and I feel like that's just my right as the creator to keep moving that way. Yeah? Did I answer your question? Okay.
Yeah, the gentleman there, yeah.
You're on.
Yeah, we
You're
can
on,
hear you.
yeah.
So as a debut novelist, how difficult was it to find a publisher? And have they approached you for a second novel, like they usually approach Chetan Bhagat, like 6 novels in advance?
Is this for any specific person? Or
Anyone?
Yeah.
Oh, well, yes, finding a publisher is not easy. Yeah, I was just lucky that after the first rejection, the second one I managed to score with. But the contract that I signed also gives the publishers the first refusal to the next novel. So they have the right to, if and when I write a novel, they have the right to say, okay, we'll take it.
Yeah, my publisher Pranab Kumar Singh of Picador is right behind. I think he can answer that. And yeah, basically publishers do have a right to refusal. So we are working on a new novel. After it's done, we'll send it to Picador once again. This is how it works.
In terms of finding a publisher, I had a magical thing happen, which will never again happen in my life. So I'll just tell you is that I had a good amount of publishers interested when I finally got the book done after thousands of years. That was really nice. It won't ever happen again. And they asked at the time, do I want to sign a 2-book contract? And I said, but it took me 10 years to do this, so maybe let me just take another 10 years and do something and I'll get back to you. So.
No, well, that's a very interesting question that you asked, because at a session sometime back, there was a talk about years ago, maybe 20, 30 years back, there were a lot of literary magazines and publications which allowed authors to write, and they had a lot of ways to express themselves. Today people read far less, and today is the age of the publishers, because they seem to be holding rules. So writers are at their beck and call and trying to get a publisher. But maybe with so many lit fests and so much of writing, we may see a day when you come back to a lot of literary magazines and articles and the literary sections of let's say, are not really T2s and metros and all, where actually people publish. And then maybe you will have writers that come up. I know for one in this city that there's a magazine called Desh, which started many years ago, and I think some of the best written Bengali authors first started writing in Desh, and that was such a pinnacle of success, that magazine. I hope there'll be many more Deshes in India someday. Yes, Mrs. Venkateshwar.
This is addressed to all three. Would you dare to introduce into your books, say, a well-known personality in society who perhaps you know well enough and whose idiosyncrasies or quirks you have a personal account of? Would you like to camouflage it if you were to introduce him in your book, or just take the risk, or do you have to take his permission that you're bringing him to life in your book? What do you think about that?
Well, I'm really excited about whatever you're writing. So I would say with a personality in a fiction, what I would do personally, if I were putting an actual person that was well known to others into a fiction novel, I would probably change enough aspects of that, because I find that when you pull directly from life, for me personally, it deadens the text. You have to have a place to kind of breathe life around it. That's the way that I would do that. Do you have to have permission? If you're really taking somebody real, then yes, you'll get into all sorts of legal issues. If you're simply writing that person into a fictional book and you're taking liberties with their life, yes.
Yeah, often like Hanif Qureshi in his...
Can I just... sorry. I have, in my novel, I have talked about some professors I've experienced. And I know that the famous names, so I have definitely camouflaged them. I have not used any names. But somebody who has studied under that particular professor would know who it is. But I think, yes, because of legal tangles, I was afraid to use any names.
Yeah, what authors do usually, Hanif Qureshi, who wrote a novel, very nice, funny novel called The Last Word. It was about the relationship between V.S. Nair and Patrick French, somebody who goes to translation. So it was about that. But there he doesn't use Naipaul's name or of the Patrick French's names. He creates two different characters and keeps enough clues for everybody else to know who we are talking about. This is probably how we would like to do. Not that.
Yes, Mr. Dutt.
Do any of the authors really think about a place, the climate, away from the hullabaloo of city life, which will be a better place to write? Because I know that Anita Desai has written a lot in a place called Kalimpong. Some more writing at that particular place has been done by her daughter Kiran Desai. Does this play a role in your writings?
I have a deep fantasy of having such a place, but I actually work in a loft in downtown Brooklyn where it's actually this is so random, but it's actually a storage place for carnival furniture. So it's me and several horses that would otherwise be moving but aren't, and typing away furiously. And a lot of work gets done there too, but it's somewhat more amusing.
Yeah, I think we all dream of having a cottage in the hills, but again, I have got my day jobs, so I don't think of that, so I have to just manage in Calcutta while doing the other things which I have to do.
Yes, well, I agree with both of you. Fantasy is always there. But I have retired, so I don't work anymore, but I find that, there are financial constraints to go having this kind of a lovely getaway or retreat. So I have to be happy with the study where my wife dumps all the stuff, like carnival horses. But I managed to find a corner with my computer.
We should mention that if anyone here has a beautiful house in the woods they want us to write in, we can do that for you. Yeah. You do? Oh no.
Publishers are
Leasing out beautiful
beautiful spots for writers to write. So check that with your publishers at the end of this.
I'm gonna find my publisher right now.
Yes, we'll take one or two more questions because last question. There are two hands, so we'll give it to both the ladies if it's okay. The lady at the back, yeah.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, this is, I'm interested in writing and I've been writing, but this is a problem like most of us face. I think that there's something called time management. And as a writer, if you want to enhance your... Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
If you want to enhance your writing, I guess you need to read a lot. That given our competition and, academics and everything, you hardly get time, to read more. So what would be your take on that? Like, if you can just give us a word of it.
Well, I think what you really want, you make time for it. It doesn't matter. You don't have time, that is not the excuse. If you really want, you will make the time for it. You have to do that. That's a constant struggle. And you really have to do it yourself.
This is true. I mean, I have a job and a child, and it never got any easier after school. So I do think that you have to take it seriously, and you have to just say, "I'm going to do this." And you know what? This sounds so silly, but stop looking at the internet for half an hour a day, and you'll get 30 minutes right there.
Well, I sympathize with what you're saying, but at the same time, if you are very keen to write, why do you necessarily have to read so many other books? Just write.
And if I may just add, of all the resources available to you, the one that we take most for granted is time. But if you notice, time is one resource that you can't put in a fixed deposit. Time is one resource that I cannot go to Devdan and say, "Can I borrow 10 minutes of your time from your life?" Time is one resource that I can't give to anyone. So please treat this resource, since you're very young, very, very carefully. Because from now till the day you die, you have just that amount of resource left. Use it very wisely. Because any other resource you can do a lot with. This is one resource you can't. So manage it very well. Yes, the last question. Thank you very much. Question from this young lady, and that's really the last question that we can take. So it's all over to you.
Hello, my question is addressed to Mira. I would like to ask that how much of your American Indian upbringing has influenced the characters in your book? I mean, what are the dynamics of a girl who is both an Indian and an American? What is the environment at your home which really makes the person that you are today? What are the dynamics?
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna say you might have to read the book for the full answer to that question. But yeah, I absolutely, that's in there because I felt like we were invisible in that desert. I felt like there was no us. My family was the third that we know of, the third East Indian family in the state. Okay, so there were no others of us, and that definitely it takes place in these relationships that you see where we meet the characters in here meet other Indian families that are in no way in this country would they have been friends, and yet they become friends because they're out in that desert together. So I would say that's a huge part of the identity of the book, and the rest of it you're really just going to have to get it to understand.
Actually, I would like to ask one more thing. Is there a character conflict within you, like being two characters at the same time?
Being both Indian and American?
Indian and an American. Is there a
Yes,
conflict?
of course there is, but I would say everybody has those inherent contradictions. I'm in a special place where I can say it's about being Indian and American, but everybody has those. I'm both my father's daughter and my mother's bright light. You know, everybody has those shifts in themselves. Mine are just easier to name.
And I think on this wonderful note, we shall end this session. Thank you very much, Mira Jacobs.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And Devdan Chaudhuri. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for braving this wonderful winter sunshine, being with us, as Abhijit put it, the very difficult session when it's just after lunch, and encouraging our debut novelists. The books are available at the bookstores. It's, I think, also available outside if you'd like to get them signed. Thank you very much for being such a wonderful audience, and thank you to all of you. We hope to see many more of you on stage in the future literary fest. Thank you very much.